John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta offered some potential hints about Lamar Jackson's future with the Baltimore Ravens. We talk about everything Harbaugh and DeCosta had to say to the media at their combine press conferences, get into the NFLPA survey and team report cards and what the players had to say about the organization, and so much more coming up next here on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. We are here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for being here with us today on this Thursday, tuning in, making us your first listen each and every day. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcasts, all podcasting platforms, including over in video form on YouTube. And we are back. It is a Thursday, the second day of March. And yesterday, a lot of big news and a lot of big comments from both John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta as they spoke to the media. And we have a lot to talk about. Of course, regarding Lamar Jackson, they were asked plenty about that, much like I predicted on yesterday's show. So score one for me there. But also about other things, such as the cornerback class, such as Marcus Peters and getting draft capital and Todd Monken. So there's a lot we'll dive into both. We'll talk about Eric DeCosta and what he had to say in the first segment, then move into John Harbaugh, what he had to say in the second segment. And then in the final segment, we'll be shifting away from that and talking a bit about the NFLPA players survey that was pretty much team report cards. And this was done by the NFLPA, and it was player opinion. So they were asked a bunch about the organizations, and for the Ravens, there were some interesting tidbits, both good and bad, for the Ravens in the survey and what the players had to say about the organization. So a ton to dive into here today on Locked On Ravens. If you're here with us in video form, thank you so much for tuning in and seeing my face and my background and everything. Be sure to like the video here, subscribe as well to the channel. We're looking for 4,000. Our next goal is 4,000 here on Locked On Ravens. And then in audio form, thank you so much to all the audio listeners as well. It's the same show, both audio and video. So if one day you want to do audio, then another day you want to do video, you can do that 100%. We're available again anywhere in audio form you get your podcast. So be sure to follow along anywhere you get your shows. And thank you again for all the support here. But let's first talk now, Eric DeCosta comments and what he had to say, obviously, about Lamar Jackson and just the team in general. Well, obviously for DeCosta, he said that he and Lamar Jackson recently did meet and said that he's optimistic in that he'll see where things end up going, and said that it's an ongoing discussion. He said they both understand the urgency of the situation. He said it's been a good dialogue, a good discussion, and he continues, of course, to be optimistic. And then he got into a bit of the challenges of contract negotiations without an agent and said that I'll read the quote. He said, quote, "You have a lot of regard for the player first and foremost. I think when you deal with an agent, sometimes you're able to speak very freely and position yourself a certain way. You have different arguments that you can use that maybe you wouldn't say to a player. So I think that's part of it. There's a lot of respect, tremendous respect, because I'm with a player like Lamar Jackson, like Roquan Smith, who also represented himself. Every day you see the commitment, you understand where they're coming from. So it's definitely a different dynamic. It can be challenging, but it's doable, as we've proven, and we continue to be optimistic about it." So this answer from DeCosta actually was very in-depth and very detailed and very honest. I think this was a very honest answer, because I think, and a lot of people, like, we've talked about this exact thing, and it's not necessarily like new news, but the fact that DeCosta came out and said this, I think, was a very honest thing for him to do, because he's right. And obviously he's right because he's doing it. But the fact of the matter is, for a player, you're pretty much sitting there if a player's negotiating for themselves. So there's no agent. You're sitting there and you're telling this player, yeah, we really like you. You know, we want you to be a part of our organization. But here's why, and for Lamar Jackson in particular, here's why we don't think you're worth a fully guaranteed contract. Or here's why we're not willing to give you a fully guaranteed contract. With an agent, the agent can, say to the player, or the team can position to the agent, as DeCosta said. So there is definitely a different dynamic when it comes to actually negotiating with an agent versus not an agent. But then DeCosta also said that he wasn't going to discuss any specifics about the contract. And that actually, he said, was an agreement made with Jackson 2 years ago when the whole process started. So I don't think that was put out there. I think that was actually a piece of new information, where I think now we're seeing part of the reason why stuff is so tight-lipped. We're not hearing anything from the Ravens, not hearing anything from Lamar Jackson. Apparently it was because of this agreement that Lamar and the Ravens made a couple of years ago. So that was very interesting. But then DeCosta ended up also talking about the different plans, different avenues that the Ravens could have, both with or without Lamar, and ended up saying that they have 4, 5, or 6 different plans depending on what happens with Jackson, but did reiterate the fact that they want Lamar in Baltimore. So that's kind of what I hypothesized on yesterday's show, and honestly shows throughout the course of the week here, where, yeah, look, they definitely have plan A, plan B, plan C, however many plans they have, but they can't fully move forward with that until, something does happen. Because if you look at free agency, you look at the draft, those are ever-changing things where it does depend. And so hopefully we get someone before the start of free agency here, whether that is exclusive versus non-exclusive. I know those are conversations that have been going on a lot over the course of these last couple of weeks, couple of months, obviously. And I think it's looking more and more likely that the Ravens will probably put some sort of franchise tag on Jackson just to have something. And they say they're always preparing for the contingency. DeCosta saying, look at every situation for agency in the draft or whatnot. And then it was actually asked about the franchise tagging situation with Lamar specifically, and talked about how there were a couple different situations where that can go. And obviously the different franchise tags, exclusive versus non-exclusive, but did say they're hopeful they'll get a deal done with Jackson before that happens. And they haven't actually made a decision on a franchise tag, which one of those they would use in that. And actually did say that, obviously there's no doubt that Lamar deserves a higher echelon, or to be in the higher echelon of NFL quarterback salaries. And pretty much also some of the stuff that I wanted to kind of figure out was with the Ravens, if they were going to scout some of these quarterbacks. And DeCosta was asked specifically about that, and said that he's going to look at all the top players, kind of got into his process of how he's a scout, and he doesn't shortchange scouting. And he's going to look at the top 150 players in every single draft class, look at the top guys in free agency. And so you have to evaluate those types of players. But also he was asked about wanting Lamar Jackson in Baltimore, and said you can't win in this league without a strong quarterback. That's been proven. So we want Lamar here. We think he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league, certainly one of our best players, and we want him back. So we understand that living in a world without a quarterback is a bad world to live in. And I think there are a lot of GMs and coaches who probably say that and who are living in that world right now. We are aware that I think we've been blessed since 2008 to have Joe Flacco and Lamar Jackson, and my goal is to continue that. That was his full quote on the situation. I agree with him. Going back to quarterback mediocrity, I do not think is the smart move for the Ravens. I think with these, bridge guys, or, hitting on a rookie, the Ravens hit on Lamar Jackson, but there's no guarantee they'd hit again on another quarterback prospect. There, of course, is the possibility, but just rolling through that whole situation, it is much harder than it looks to just hit on a quarterback. And because there's no Lamar Jackson, there's no other Lamar Jackson, there's no other Patrick Mahomes. All these guys are 1-1 for the most part. So it's kind of interesting to have that situation. But moving away a bit from the Lamar talk, from what DeCosta had to say, definitely feels like one of my big takeaways from his press conference was that the Ravens are probably going to end the 2023 draft with more than 5 picks. It just feels that way. DeCosta was asked about the whole philosophy of having draft picks and investing in more draft picks, and said that you have to have a lot of draft picks every year, said that you have to draft a lot of players because guys do get hurt, and having more picks proves over a long time to actually be a good thing, and actually compared it to investing in the stock market. I think DeCosta's missing that second rounder. I think he's really missing that. Not like that he regrets trading it for Roquan Smith. I think they're very happy with that deal, but I think he just wants a second rounder. He wants more picks. I'd be shocked. I'd be floored if the Ravens ended the draft with 5 picks. I just think that there are too many needs, and it's not like they have a laundry list of stuff they have to do, but there are multiple positions where they need multiple players. I think you fill that through free agency and through the draft. And I think one of those is wide receiver. And DeCosta said that they're going to keep swinging at the wide receiver position, and hopefully at one of these points we'll hit the ball out of the park. And actually said he sees 5 or 6 first-round wide receivers. So that was an interesting part of DeCosta's press conference. And also talked a bit about Marcus Peters, and said that he's had a couple of conversations already with Marcus Peters and his agent, and the discussions remain ongoing there, and had a lot of praise. It felt like Marcus Peters really could be a part of this team moving forward, at least in 2023. Now, obviously for me, I would hope that would be on a more of a team-friendly deal, that side of things. I don't think paying Marcus Peters $10 million plus a year is within the Ravens' best interest anymore, but on a team-friendly deal to be a borderline number 2, like low-end number 2, high-end number 3, depending on how you look at him, even a mid-tier corner too. I think that's a very good place to be if you're the Ravens. Then you can continue to invest, and if you can get Peters and add another one of those guys, whether it's through free agency or through the draft, I think that's really, really important. Also had a lot of good things to say about J.K. Dobbins and Rashad Bateman, and also addressed a bit about Lamar not traveling to Cincinnati, said that obviously that was an injury thing. That's what he said. Talked about Justin Houston a little bit and how if that were to happen, if they were to re-sign him, which I am team Justin Houston all the way, that's been my thing, it would probably happen later in the offseason, and talked about how the last two times that Justin Houston signed with the Ravens, it was later in the process. And also talked about the cornerback class a lot and is really excited about that, and that Todd Monken would have a voice in the draft process. So it was a very insightful, lot of obviously based around Lamar Jackson, but a lot of different topics talked about. But I think it did give us some insight into, look, the Ravens no doubtedly want Lamar Jackson in Baltimore, but obviously there's still a lot to dive into in the situation. Franchise tag, what happens with the extension, and whatnot. So very insightful stuff from DeCosta during his press conference. We're not done talking press conferences. We'll talk more this time about what John Harbaugh had to say coming up next here on Locked On Ravens. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back. If your first bet doesn't win, just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes, drain, and the Nuggets. I'm a Denver Nuggets guy. Those who listen might have an idea about that. They host the Grizzlies on Friday, tomorrow. It's a big game. It's a big game. Number 1 seed versus number 2 seed. I'll be looking at that money line, point spreads, and whatnot. And they also have so many more exclusive bets over at FanDuel, like the 2x3, which is 2 3-pointers scored in the first 3 minutes. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. So don't miss a chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockdown. That's FanDuel.com/lockdown to learn more. Make every moment more. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. We return here. It's our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here on this Thursday following the press conferences of Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh. And we talked about DeCosta in the first segment. We'll move now into John Harbaugh. And again, very insightful things said by John Harbaugh here. And again, we can always get into how much of this is coach speak, how much of this is GM speak. But I do think that while, they're not going to give away their whole stash of secrets, they are talking from a place of, hey, we can get stuff out there, the just right amount of stuff out there if they want to. So for Harbaugh, started off obviously the question about Lamar Jackson, and he actually said that he's been texting back and forth with Lamar here and there ever since the season is over. Said Lamar's done a great job in terms of developing as a quarterback and winning games, and it was actually asked about his thoughts about life without quarterback Lamar Jackson, and said, hasn't thought about it very much, as little as possible, and that his plans are for Lamar to be there. And one of the things that the Ravens did, he said, is that we went through the process of offensive coordinators, the 14 candidates, 21 different interviews. Instead, this talked about the process, said they were extensive interviews, Zoom, in person, and it comes up and said that, part of that is if Lamar's the quarterback, how are we going to build the offense? That's the direction they're planning for. Also said that he is very hopeful and excited, and he cannot wait for it to get done. So that was like can't wait for it to get done. That's really cool. Love that. And there were reports about Lamar not having his input taken into consideration when selecting the offensive coordinator, and, said that it wasn't black, was very non-committal on this one, said that it wasn't black and white. What does it mean? He's heard different words about it, different iterations. And he said Lamar and Harbaugh himself had a very good conversation after the season about every aspect of the offense, and that it matters to Lamar. And said that Lamar wants to be involved in the wide receivers and the offensive line, the scheme. He wants to be a part of that best offense in football. But so what I think this whole, and I've said this, I'm going to stand firm in the fact that I think that the Ravens gave him input in terms of asking, hey, what do you want here? What do you want there? But they didn't sit him down in these interviews and have him lead the interviews. So in terms of input, I actually agree with him in the fact that it is a very it's what does it actually mean? What does input? What's the definition of input? But at the end of the day, I think that the Ravens, they had a conversation with Lamar. I'm sure they asked him about, hey, what do you see here? What do you see there? And they took that input into consideration. And I think obviously it goes vice versa, where you obviously have to take into account if you're an offensive coordinator candidate, whether the offense is going to be with or without Lamar. And Todd Monken was obviously the guy there, and also called Lamar Jackson his quarterback. He said, he's my quarterback. He's my guy. And Harbaugh also talked about, said because Lamar was hurt, he didn't go to the playoff game. And also talked a bit about the coaching situation, said that, they're still looking for a receivers coach, a safeties coach, and obviously did not dismiss the internal possibilities of those as well. But also talked about another coaching change during the press conference, said that outside linebackers coach Rob Leonard is actually leaving to become the Raiders defensive line coach. So that is another opening. Also confirmed Kyle Hamilton had wrist surgery. Doesn't expect that to impact any availability though. So that is very good. And also talked about how Keith Williams is going to return, but the roles are still kind of, they're flowing right now is what the situation is. And then for Harbaugh, also talked about, how he spoke with Lamar about every aspect of that offense, but again, was very non-committal about the whole offensive coordinator situation. And talked a bit about the cornerback class as well. Harbaugh said that he's already seen about 10 guys who could be a first or a second round pick. But then an interesting comment did come out from John Harbaugh about the Todd Monken situation and kind of how that whole thing got going. And, the situation was unique, I would say, because, that's what Harbaugh called it. He said that for Monken, it was unique for us. It's unique for Lamar, unique for the offense. And, it wasn't locked into a system quite as much. And also said that he didn't really look at the Georgia offense, didn't have time to break down the Georgia offense on film before the Monken interview process, which I thought was very interesting. I don't think it's a best practice. Like, I wouldn't recommend every team to say, hey, we're just going to go into this without breaking down the film before interviewing a guy. I don't really, and it's honestly funny because there was a lot of talk. Harbaugh, when he introduced Monken, he talked about the actual, this is how it happened, where he got a call from his sister and Tom Crean and this, that, and the other, where a lot of people didn't. I think it actually nobody really talked about it. I was very surprised because the whole thing with the Ravens is they hire from within. It's a family organization. You only get in if you're part of the Harbaugh system, the Harbaugh family, you have a connection to Harbaugh. But no one really talked about it that way. And then this is actually, I think this got that point going more, which I was actually very surprised by, that it didn't even get a lot of blowback when Harbaugh said it, which, again, I don't think is a good or a bad thing, but it just was an interesting part. But two, that this quote was the thing that I think got a lot more people talking about it with Harbaugh and what ended up happening there. So it's a process for the Ravens to obviously get Monken involved here for the Ravens and getting Monken, up to speed. But, Jonas Schaefer put out some more from Harbaugh and, some quotes. I believe that 200% Lamar wants to be a Raven, and talked about how, Keith Williams is going to return. Also said he loves Craig Versteeg and James Urban, but no word on the roles yet, but still also sees Kyle Hamilton as a safety with some nickelback flexibility in there. So I think it's interesting. There are a lot of conversation points, but the stuff that I took away is that, look, the Ravens really want Lamar to be there. Like, they can say this, but a lot of people can talk about, yeah, well, they're just saying it to say it. Like, they're in front of, microphones in the media. They have to say it. They don't really have to say it. Like, they've been adamant throughout this entire process. They want Lamar in Baltimore. But again, the sticking point has been the whole guaranteed versus non-guaranteed money and what that whole situation is. So I don't know what the deal is going to be moving forward. Obviously, as I talked about, I think some form of a franchise tag is going to be applied here, whether it's exclusive versus non-exclusive. I know there have been, I think Tim Hasselbeck said, what team's going to, pay Lamar a fully guaranteed deal and give up 2 first rounders? I think a lot of teams would do that just based off the player Lamar is. I think a team, at least one, would do it. So I think exclusive, if they trade him, they could get more there. But again, the Ravens haven't decided on that, as Eric DeCosta said. But, John Harbaugh calling Lamar his guy, saying they've been texting back and forth. Eric DeCosta speaking with Lamar. But again, we haven't heard a lot about it. And I go back to the point DeCosta said about how there was an agreement between Lamar and the Ravens about how there wouldn't be anything put out there. So I think that's why we haven't heard a lot about it. I think it's smart. I think it is smart to have that situation just be one that's done internally, but there is a point about, what's the agent situation? And obviously we know what it is, but what is the negotiating process like without an agent? It's different, as Eric DeCosta said, but I think Harbaugh and DeCosta both reaffirm their commitment to Jackson and being able to say that, yeah, they want him as their quarterback there in Baltimore. And I think, again, we've heard what Mark Andrews had to say. We've heard what Lamar has to say. I think it's the same way, but we heard the reports come out about the NFLPA trying to tell Lamar to stick his ground on the fully guaranteed deal front. So we'll see, because it seems like the Ravens aren't willing to go that far, and Lamar wants them to go that far. But again, insightful stuff all around the board, both about Lamar and about the direction of the team. I came away feeling better about the whole process and the whole situation. But again, there's so much that can change. Literally, drop of a pin, something can change. So we'll see. But coming up, we will talk about a bit about the NFLPA survey, the report cards from the players about what they had to say about the Ravens organization. Some good and some bad in there for sure. So be sure to stay tuned. So lots to dive into on the show. We've returned here. It's our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on Thursday. Thank you so much again for tuning in and making us your first listen each and every day here. Again, free and available anywhere you get your podcasts, including on YouTube. So be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube. Follow along in audio form as well. And we will now be moving outside of the DeCosta and Harbaugh press conferences, talking a bit about the NFLPA, who released the first ever report card survey, which is actually a survey done from players. So they got the players to put together a survey here of what they thought about their organization. So this is a survey done about what each player, what a contingent of players from each team thinks about how the Ravens operate. And the Ravens, there were some very interesting things for a lot of franchises here. The Commanders did not have a good survey. The Cardinals did not. The Ravens were, they were in the middle. They ranked 17th out of 32 teams in terms of total score, total grades. And I'll kind of just read through everything. They were based off of categories, and those categories were given grades by the players, and then those grades were then put together and ranked out of each and every team. So 17th out of 32 for the Ravens. The overview here, I'll read it out. The Baltimore Ravens come in ranked 17th overall in our team guide. The main areas of concern stemming from player respondents' opinions are a desire to improve the quality of food, weight room equipment, recovery resources, and training staff. At the core of these issues is the team's former head strength coach, Steve Saunders, who should be parted ways with. Assessment of him by player respondents was marked negative. Only 38% of player respondents felt that they received an individualized plan for their strength training, and many complained that the training room is understaffed. The players do believe in Ravens owner Steve Bisciotti's commitment to high quality, as 100% of them believe he is willing to invest in upgrades to the facility. So Steve Saunders was the point here, and we'll get into it as we kind of break down the categories, but that seemed to be the most interesting thing, and one that I think a lot of people kind of knew and weren't surprised by. But I think people were surprised. Treatment of families was C+, which was tied for 18th. Support of players' families ranked 17th. They offer a family room. Daycare is provided. The post-game gathering area is ranked 26th. I think a lot more expected this to be higher, myself included. Now, being tied for 18th isn't like you're last in the league, but I think that for the reputation of the team, I think that a lot of people were shocked that it was only tied for 18th and only a C+ there. For food service and nutrition, the Ravens got a B-, tied for 13th, and the quality of food ranked 17th, all three meals provided, and 98% of players say that there is enough room in the cafeteria. So B-, solid, tied for 13th, top half of the league. Quality of food is more so right in the middle, bottom-ish half, but literally like right in the middle. So nothing too crazy here. Like, I think this is fine. Obviously, you'd like it to be higher. Like, don't get me wrong. But, hopefully they can improve on that a little bit. Weight room, C+, tied for 22nd. Players mentioned a lack of space and lack of quality equipment. 90% feel they have enough strength coaches. So this one's interesting. The weight room, lack of space, everything could be just put together a little bit. The equipment, maybe there'll be upgrades there. So you don't want to see tied for 22nd in the weight room, but, it's something that maybe, again, Steve Bisciotti can improve upon there. Strength coaches, F-, and there is a lengthy description for this one. 32nd, last in the league. 30 of the 32 teams in the NFL gave their strength coaches fairly positive reviews. Baltimore is one of the two teams that fell well below the rest, and they were even significantly below the second worst team. Players do not feel like the strength staff helps them be more successful. The team recently parted ways with head strength coach Steve Saunders, so we will be interested to see if this area improves in his absence. 36% of players believe that they receive an individual plan, ranked 32nd. The Steve Saunders parting of ways, firing, whatever it is, should have happened back in 2020 when the whole COVID situation came out, the alleged COVID situation came out with him, where he had symptoms and came in anyway, and that's the start of the outbreak for the Ravens that cost a lot of players a lot of games and was a very serious thing. That is when the Ravens probably should have parted ways with him. It was too long, and obviously the injury situation in 2021 did not help things, and based off of this, he was not very well liked within the Ravens organization based off of players. So hopefully this is improved. Obviously they went in a new direction, still internal, so that's the interesting part to me is the internal hire going to be, is it going to be same philosophies? Is that going to stay the same? Obviously, I think moving on from Saunders is a positive, but we'll see what the rest of the situation unfolds and how it ends up going. Training room was C, ranked 21st. Players feel there could be more equipment and resources to help them get healthier quicker. Staffing, 84% feel they have enough ATC, 67% feel they have enough PTs, 7th worst in the league. Steam room and sauna, there's a steam room, 90% feel it's big enough. There is a sauna, 89% feel it's big enough. Tubs, 71% of players feel like they have enough hot tub space, 67% of players feel like they have enough cold tub space. So 21st in the league, again, kind of bottom-ish half, kind of trending in the middle of the pack there. Maybe they can get more equipment. Again, maybe Steve Bisciotti can invest in that. It seems like equipment is a very big point for this team, so maybe there'll be more of that moving forward. Training staff overall was a B+, tied for 22nd. The players feel that the training staff moderately adds to their success. Most teams rated their training staffs positively, which is why they come in and rank tied for 22nd. But the Ravens players gave their staff relatively positive marks overall, which is why the overall grade is still high. So, okay, yeah, B+ is a good grade, tied for 22nd. It doesn't look good on paper, but as they explain here in the handbook for the report card for the NFLPA, just because it's tied for 22nd doesn't mean it's a bad thing, because a lot of teams rank their training staffs positively. Locker room was an A, tied for 5th. The players feel like they have one of the best locker rooms in the league. 94% of players feel like they have enough space, ranked 12th. The Ravens locker room is great. It's I think very modern. A lot of players have their space. It's kind of lit up purple. They have areas in it. So I do think that the locker room, I agree with this, is one of the best. Team travel was A, tied for 4th. 93% of players feel like they have enough room to spread out. No roommates, a lot of first-class seats offered to players. So some good and some bad here. The locker room and obviously the travel was, I think, the two big key pieces in this, like the very good and training staff as well, just in terms of overall the B+. But obviously you got the strength coaches, which is a very big negative, training rooms, weight rooms, treatment of families. So overall, again, we'll run through it one more time. Treatment of families, C+, tied for 18th. Food service and nutrition, B-, tied for 13th. Weight room, C+, tied for 22nd. Strength coaches, F-, 32nd. I've never seen an F- grade before, by the way. That is just crazy. Training room, C, which is 21st. Training staff, B+, tied 22nd. Locker room, A, tied 5th. Team travel, A, tied 4th. So this is very insightful. I think, again, it gives the players a voice here. There's no Lamar Jackson gave these grades and J.K. Dobbins gave these. It's none of that. Obviously, it's a full approach to being able to get multiple players' voices for all the teams about what is going on from a player perspective. So if you're saying, well, the players, if you're talking about, well, yeah, I know the players like this, or I know the players like that, or they don't, have a clear and concrete, this is what they said in the NFLPA survey. So I hope they do this moving forward. I think it was a very good thing for them to do. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Let me get back here tomorrow. We'll be rounding out the week. More Ravens talk, so be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will see you right back here tomorrow.